Welcome to the 2020 New Testament Challenge. The rest of this week, we're going to be looking into Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11. Today, we're looking at chapter 9. Now, all three of these chapters go together because Paul has linked them all together as he's making an argument. What is he saying? He's telling us about God's character. First, here in chapter 9, he's letting us know about the sovereignty of God. In chapter 10, it's the justice of God. In chapter 11, it's the faithfulness of God. Here in chapter 9, Paul is telling us that God is sovereign, that he can do what he wants to do, that he sees beyond the visible, and that he is looking for faith. Here in chapter 9, Paul is sharing first his heart with those that he's writing to. He says in verse 2, "I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart, for I wish that I myself were cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers, those of my own race." Paul is saying that his heart is aching that they might know Christ, that they would experience all that God has for them. Because he said, we've been given so much, even outlines it beginning in verse 4. The people of Israel, he says, theirs is the adoption as sons. Theirs the divine glory, the covenants, the receiving of the law, the temple worship, and the promises. Theirs are the patriarchs. Paul is saying that we as Israelites have been given everything by God, but we've not accepted what he really wanted to say to us. He's telling us first that we were adopted as sons, that we became part of God's family, not because of anything that we did, because we were the least in number of all the nations, but God chose us as his own. Not only that, we've experienced the divine glory. We have seen God's power, Paul says, experienced throughout our history. We've been given the law. We know what God's will is. He has given us his word as though we were very breath in print. Not only that, we have temple worship. When we worship, God inhabits the praises of his people and we experience his presence. No other people can say what God is telling us here. Not only that, Paul says, we have been given his promises, the great and precious promises. And we have our patriarchs. We've been given examples in our past of those that have walked by faith. In chapter 4, Paul said we've been given Abraham, and he was credited as righteous before God. Why? Because he simply believed God. And here in chapter 9, that's what Paul is saying. That's what God is looking for, people that will simply believe him. And then he says, beginning in verse 30, that the Gentiles have been brought in because of faith, and you, Israelites, you've been rejected because you did not want to walk by faith, but by works instead. Listen to what Paul says in verse 30. "What then shall we say? That the Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have obtained it, a righteousness that is by faith. But Israel, who pursues a law of righteousness, has not obtained it." Why not? Because they pursued it not by faith, but as if it were by works. The Israelites were trying to say, it's my heritage that's going to get me approval before God. It's the good things that I'm doing. I am following the law. And God is telling them, those things don't mean anything. I am looking at the heart and I'm looking for faith and belief. The Israelites, they wanted to walk by works and not by faith. The Gentiles walked by faith and not by works. And that's what he is saying here, that we need to believe in Jesus. We need to accept Jesus, and we need to surrender to Jesus as Lord of our life. Paul tells us exactly how to do that by faith. He says in chapter 10, verse 9, that if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, we will be saved. That's the answer. That's what God is looking for. But here in chapter 9, Paul is laying out that the Jews, most of them, wanted to walk and live by works. The Gentiles, they lived by faith, and so therefore they were accepted. And when we accept Jesus and we live by faith and we call him our Lord, surrendering to his lordship, then we are saved. Saved from sin's penalty. We're saved from the penalty of sin, which is death. We are saved from sin's power. No longer are we under its power. We are now dead to sin, but alive to God. And then one day we will be saved from sin's presence as well. We will be with God forever. We will be seeing him face to face. And where does it start? It starts by faith. God is looking for faith. Faith in you and faith in me. Thank you for joining the 2020 New Testament Challenge.